Well, it's been a few weeks since the Drukhari Codex dropped, and it seems like they're carrying off quite a lot of tournament trophies all the way back to Comera. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where today we're focusing on the Dark Eldar once more. From when the Codex dropped, it certainly looked like they were going to be a strong army in 9th, far stronger than they were, and now the first few grand tournaments have been played with them, it seems that they might be stronger than anything else in the entire game. With that in mind, in this video, we'll first talk about how they've been doing in their initial events, a quick overview of the things that I think make Drukhari the winning faction at the moment, and then talk through a few potential counters to them that armies might start to adopt if they do become really prevalent. So firstly, how strong are they performing at the moment? If you take a look on Warhammer 40k Stats Center, the excellent website that collates big tournament results, and I'll link down in the video description, 6 out of the last grand tournaments that they've recorded have been won by Drukhari. That really is some pretty insane numbers, to be honest, and they also record win ratio, with Drukhari achieving a massive 70% of wins across the 175 games that have been played across these events. They're pretty monumental numbers, to be honest, really getting to the point where they might have been fairly similar to the dominance of Iron Hands back when their crazily strong codex came out in 8th edition. There's no doubt that they are a strong codex, though I would perhaps maybe temper that hype slightly with the fact that this is likely a bit of a grace period for them, and generally codexes get a small amount of a boost just after they came out, where people just aren't really familiar with playing the new rules for the faction, so they don't really have counters built into their lists, and they're far more likely to get caught out by sneaky tricks or underestimating the damage or durability of certain units. Even taking this into account though, it is still very strong. So let's talk about what's making them work quite so well in 9th. Now Drukhari are generally a fairly fragile faction, but they make up for that by being lightning fast and hitting the enemy very hard. I think the new codex has done a reasonable job of keeping to that formula. Barring a couple of exceptions, the majority of their units really aren't all that durable still, but they can be very good at overwhelming the enemy with lots of threats to deal with, and all of those threats can generally hit very hard. Most competitive lists are building around raiders at the moment, and they're in a really good spot right now. The Dark Lance going up to damage D3+3 means that you get quite a lot of incidental anti-tank firepower just spread out over the list. It's particularly potent in Blackheart, where all the raiders get one reroll to hit, which makes that single shot far more reliable and far more deadly. With all the -1 damage mechanics going around, the big damage number is really quite powerful. Clustered up in all those raiders are generally some devastating melee units that hit far above their points. I've talked about them a few times on the channel already, but Drazar, various succubus builds, and the Archon with the Gym Blade and the Warlord traits to allow rerolls all hit crazily well for the points that you invest in them, particularly the succubus, who's a 60-point character who can dance through entire squads of elite infantry in a single fight phase. They can be backed up by incubi and witches, depending on whether you want absolutely bucket loads of strength 4 AP-1 attacks, or going for the incubi, where they strike at strength 5 AP-2 and damage 2, and still get tons of attacks as well. Whenever any of these units get into combat, there's a good chance they'll pay for their points cost then and there, but if they get caught out, then they're still going to get gunned down fairly easily. Even the slowest moving troops in the Drukhari can move really quickly. All of these guys in the raiders can jump out, advance and charge, and make some colossal long charges across the battlefield. But that gets even sillier when you look at the Drukhari fast attack, the Reavers and Hellions. Reavers can go a crazy distance, zap you with heat lances, and still charge, and Hellions are a bit slower but a bit more efficient in melee. Even if they don't have the crazy damage outputs per point compared with some of the units in raiders, the fact that you get the choice of where to apply it, even if it's like on a unit right at the back of the opponent's lines, is quite powerful. Of course, these two both get their devastating slash attacks as well, where you can get quite a lot of mortal wounds out of them on infantry units. Finally, cropping up in quite a lot of lists are liquefier racks. Racks armed with 2 liquefier guns and using the Dark Technomancer's trait. That's the one that makes them +1 to wound and 2 damage, so those guns will melt pretty much anything that they shoot at. Not bad when they're already on fairly durable OBSEC infantry platforms that are still good for scoring objectives even if they don't have anything in range. Drukhari aren't particularly known well for fighting fair either, and here are some of their more punishing sneaky tricks. One of the things that makes them quite obnoxious to deal with in melee are the numerous fight last abilities that they can use, including an Archon with a Warlord trait, Incubi rolling off against leadership which they can debuff, or the Homunculus with the Vexator mask, which can also provide a similar debuff. It means that you can potentially slam multiple fragile hard-hitting melee units into the enemy at once, and know that you're safe from the enemy from interrupting, and cutting down your fragile units before they get to attack. A lot of people are running raiders with Grizzly trophies at the moment. They're a cheap 5-point upgrade that provide a -2 leadership debuff nearby, and then you can potentially stack that with Dark Creed Covens for even more leadership shenanigans, vomit out a bunch of mortal wounds on the enemy with Phantasm grenade launchers, or raise the risk of them fighting last due to the Incubi's Tormentors rule, which goes off leadership. As the raiders are quite likely to be getting close anyway, having the -2 leadership does seem to be a worthwhile investment, and one of the first times that we've really seen leadership debuffs become very relevant on a top tier competitive list. Depending on your Cabal, the raiders can also do a couple of other nice maneuvers. If you're Blackheart, then they get advance and charge right from turn 1, so you could potentially be getting easy charges off into the enemy deployment zone on turn 1 with the enhanced Elysale stratagem. Or if you're running the raiders as Poison Tongue, then you can use their stratagem to redeploy 3 raiders, which when they're loaded up with lots of your fighty melee units equates to redeploying quite a big chunk of your army. You do it after you know who's going first, so if you are going first you can be aggressive, and if you're going second you can hide everything out of line of sight. That alone can potentially be a really big swing to the game and win you a turn's advantage compared with the enemy army. There's plenty more that I haven't included on the list, but another couple of minor things are movement manipulation with Fire and Fade. Can be really handy for getting the units up the board and potentially getting Obsec onto far-flung objectives, and also having a good chance of stopping enemy units from falling back, say with Witch units and Shard Nets and Impalers. Finally, as we know, 9th edition is all about objectives these days, and this is something that the Drukhari were already fairly strong at even in the previous codex. The fact that they have so many fast-moving units, a lot of which are infantry units, means that they're in pretty much an ideal place to be deploying things like engage on all fronts or deploy scramblers, where it should be very hard to stop them from maxing these too. They can use mandrakes for this if they want to, basically a 75-point investment to fade away and jump back into the opponent's deployment lines, nearly guaranteeing something like deploying scramblers in the late game. Witches, Raks and Cabalite Warriors are all fairly decent choices, and they're all also Obsec, so you don't really have much of a conflict of interest between zooming them up and jumping them onto objectives, and potentially you can make use of the Dark Creed Homunculus that can allow you to strip away Obsec from enemy units as well. It could make it very easy to take away objectives, even if you can't actually manage to wrest the enemy unit off them. Just to show a few examples of all this, here are 3 Drukhari army lists, one after the other, and these are 3 ones that have won grand tournaments. This first one is Brad Chester's list from Motor City Mayhem, with a mixed patrol that's mainly there for Poison Tongue, a Cult of Strife Witch Cult, and a Dark Technomancer's Homunculus Coven. The patrol is presumably a mixed one because he wanted to have an extra succubus there rather than the Archon, but it's mainly there to make those raiders Poison Tongue, which allow you to do the redeployment thing. All 5 raiders are in that detachment, and inside them they have 2 succubi, both of which have incredibly fighty combos, one with Quicksilver Fighter and Triptych Whip, the other one with that absolutely insane combo of Razor Flails, Grave Lotus and Competitive Edge. I talked about that in an entire video all to itself. As well as that, we also have Drazar kicking around in the Technomancer's Coven, and to fill out the raiders there's 3 units of Raks with 2 Liquefier guns, 3 5-man units of Incubi, and 2 units of Witches with Shardnet and Impaler. This one goes fairly heavy on the Mandrakes with 2 units of 5, and then 2 units of 10 Hellions as another fast-moving threat. This next one is by Connor McCormick, winner of the Wooden Spoon GT, and it is actually very similar to the previous. Instead of a mixed Cabal though, and the Raiders redeployment this time though, he has a Blackheart Cabal, taking the Archon with the Ancient Evil Warlord trait for fighting last, and because they're Blackheart that means that the Raiders could potentially first turn charge if they wanted, or just get some very nice rerolls on that Dark Lance damage output. The Cult of Strife patrol packs 2 very similar succubi, one of which has been upgraded to a Master Succubus. There are some Hecatrix Blood Brides that hit on 2s with Morvane's Agonizer. That's another relic that can prevent an enemy unit from falling back. Again, we've got the same numbers of Incubis and Raks, 15 Hellions, and even more Mandrakes this time with 3 units of them. Finally, we have a third list by Jeremiah Bergdale, winner of the Dead Primarch GT. I talked about this one previously on the channel in another video, and this one shakes up the formula a little bit more than the others. Again, we've got Blackheart, Technomancers, and Cult of Strife. This time though, we've got 2 Archons, a buffing one and a fighty one, and 2 Courts of the Archon, each have very tough units in 4 units of Slith and 4 Urgals. There's also a bunch of Scourges in this one, 2 units of 5, each with 4 Shredders for some point and delete anti-infantry, and all of the Raiders as well as Grizzly trophies also pack Phantasm grenade launchers, so you could potentially stack an awful amount of mortal wounds on one enemy unit. I am kind of slightly surprised just how convergent all of these lists are. They all revolve around exactly 5 raiders, and out of all the varied options in the Drukhari Codex, they do share really quite a ton of options. People seem to love their Dark Technomancers, Raks, Court of Strife Witches, Incubi, and fighty characters. So with all this scariness going around, how can we potentially counter some Drukhari? Obviously, as it stands at the moment, they do seem very strong. I'd certainly be expecting a tough game if you're playing anyone who knows how to play the faction well. Firstly, to counter armies, it really makes sense to know their capabilities. We've talked about some of the strongest moves that they can play, but obviously that's not everything. I've already made quite a lot of videos on the channel between the Codex review, tier rankings of their units, and a few other bits and bobs here and there, so feel free to check them out. And there's no end of talented people making battle reports as well, where you could see the Drukhari in action and get to know how they like to play. I feel at least part of their success is due to people not really knowing how to deal with them, as they play very differently to quite a lot of the other 9th edition factions that really want to stomp slowly towards the centre of the board and just hold the objectives very resiliently. If Drukhari really do start to make up a really decent amount of the meta, then it could well be worth adapting the list to have a few more weapons to deal with them. And to be honest, quite a few things are good at gunning down Drukhari vehicles and infantry. Raiders absolutely hate being shot by mass autocannon fire. Wounding on 3s and saving on 5s, they're going to go down very quickly, and you get pretty much better results out of firing an autocannon at a raider than you do a las cannon. Of course, bonus points if you get anything that's got a boost against the fly keyword, perhaps things like the Guard Hydra or Custodian's Flak Burst missiles on Virtus Praetors. Otherwise, if you can just pack in a massive amount of strength 4 shooting, that's generally going to do you good as well. Lots of strength 4 shots will mow down Raks and Witches like no tomorrow, and with the Drukhari vehicles having fairly poor saves, they really can fear small arms fire all in themselves. Ideally, I think that fairly long ranges on these weapons will help you out as well, as Drukhari are so mobile, they're likely to be all over the board, so it's quite nice to be able to have things that can reach out and bring them down. Generally, AP isn't the biggest deal when fighting Drukhari armies. Most of the optimal weapons will be things like bolt rifles, heavy bolters, or autocannons, things with AP -1 that often push them onto their invul saves. Obviously, you'll still need other weapons such as high power anti-tank things to deal with other factions, but I think there's not really that much harm in slanting a little bit towards these Dark Elf menaces. In melee, I'd certainly remember just how much damage your own units can do to the Drukhari units. If you take the initiative and manage to get some charges off on them, then you could potentially do some really hefty damage, even with your most basic infantry. You definitely need to make sure that they don't bite off more than they can chew though. Even small squads of witches could potentially be quite good targets if they do make a fair few of their 4+ invuls. You definitely need to be careful of all of their potential fight last abilities while you do so, but most of those character auras are at least fairly small, so hopefully they can be avoided most of the time. For the durability of your own unit, I think that Drukhari really are quite good at taking out most things in the game, to be honest. Not that many armies as a whole are really that good at surviving both really high intensity lance fire and also bucket loads of quality attacks from either witches, incubi, or the characters. Potentially things with high invul saves could be good, but they also have the potential to be countered by the various mortal wound things that Drukhari can do, such as flyby Helions or phantasm grenade launchers. Despite this, maybe mid-toughness units with decent invuls aren't too bad a shout. Things like Space Marine Blade Guard, Custodian Guard with Storm Shields, and Guard Bulgrin might just be in a bit more of a better place to survive than most. Interestingly, poison weapons just don't really seem to be as much of a big deal in the new Drukhari army. Sure, you could get lists that absolutely spam poison to death, but I just don't think that they're going to get taken quite as much compared with things like witches and incubi, which just have far better damage output against most things. Finally, just a thought on positioning. I think it's usually worth going with the mentality that the Drukhari army list is usually going to be able to reach the most of your units no matter where you are on the board. I don't think it's really worth all that much castling up in the corner and letting yourself go off all the objectives, as that seems like a good way to lose the game anyway, and likely the Drukhari will still be able to catch up with you and get a bunch of turn 2 charges anyway. Depending on the exact positioning of the units, I'd actually be tempted to get quite aggressive turn 1, and more go with the mentality of taking out as much Drukhari stuff before it gets the chance to take out you, rather than trying to fall back and weather the storm. Ideally, I'd just try and put as much pressure on them as possible by moving some of the scariest threats forward, hopefully in a position where they can't quite charge them. And if they do, then at least you're fighting in the midfield rather than being pinned in your own deployment zone. Overall though, as it currently stands, I certainly think that Drukhari are going to be a brutal fight if they're played by a strong player. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. Are Drukhari now the strongest army in 9th edition? Or is this all just a torturous honeymoon period before people wise up to how to deal with them? Let me know your thoughts or any potential counters that you might have found for the Drukhari down in the video comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly try and keep the regular 40k discussions coming, with new videos pretty much every day. And finally, if you have been enjoying a lot of the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that it's all made possible by the channel's Patreon page, where generous people permit me to do this as a full-time thing. If you'd like to help keep these videos coming, any support is enormously appreciated, and the link's in the video description. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early each week, regular votes to see what sort of things come next for the channel, and automatic entry to the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.